Focus. Ideate. Innovate. Enable.
Ladies and gentlemen, we come to our first session for Day 2, Repurposing Geopolitics. Should nations mend bridges or build stronger fences with their neighbors?
My first question, I'll turn to Amitabh Kant. Given where we are in relation to the conflict between the major powers, is it really possible to restore multilateralism?
I think that's a very important question, because we are living in a fractured world. There's the Russia-Ukraine crisis, there's the China-Taiwan crisis. But more important than that, global supply chains are disrupted. Climate action is very important, imperative for the world. And global debt is at an all-time high, all challenges for the world. It's also important to understand that this is the time when we need to truly accelerate the pace of growth for the world. There is no other grouping other than G20 which can bring consensus in the world today, because G20 accounts for about 85% of the global GDP. It accounts for 75% of the global trade. It accounts for almost 90% of the global patents and about 2/3 of the global population. So if United Nations is too large a body, G7 is too elitist a body, G20 is just the right body comprising of the richest countries in the world and the emerging markets of the world. And there is no other body which can bring in consensus on all these pressing issues of accelerating SDG, of driving technology for change, and really, truly, to my mind, to drive global growth. Growth is key. Inclusive, equitable growth is key for the world today.
I think it's one of the real challenges which Amitabh describes is how do you have bilateral tensions increasing at the same time as you have global problems? And essentially security is sharpening the bilateral tensions at the same time as health, climate change and sustainability are global problems. And that is, I guess, the challenge we all face for the next 20 years.
The Abraham Accord, when it was signed in 2020 in the United States of America, it put the whole region, or the accord put the whole region on a different track. On a track where we are saying we extend our hands of friendship. We extend the use of what we call soft powers, not coercive powers. We extend soft diplomacy, opening new channels, because history taught us that building fences just didn't work.
I will continue with Ahmed, my UAE colleague, and would say that I believe that the difference in the world today, the like-mindedness in the world today, is between leaderships who put their interest of their people, the well-being of their people ahead of a thing, and the others who have different interests rather than that. And I believe that if we look, India did in 2017 the same thing with Israel. What is called here the dehyphenation, saying, because for years the Palestinian issue was the issue in our foreign relations with many countries, including with India. And then they said, well, the Palestinian issue is an issue, but we have a lot of common interest with Israel that we want to pursue. And I think that UAE and the other Gulf countries said the same thing. And this is the like-mindedness. They said, well, we have concerns in the world, but it's not going to be that my values of being ultra-liberal or, like in the past, that this war, I think it's behind us. Each one has his own set of values. As long as the country is pursuing the well-being of its citizens, I think there is a lot of common grounds, and that's what we see now happening more and more in the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, proudly presenting our next session, Touching Souls and Conquering Minds, learning from authors, actors, and lyricists.
My first question goes to you, Kabir sir. And of course, being a voracious bookworm as a reader, I've gone through your book. It's a remarkable book, and I also saw you in some of the interviews around the book. And it's actually an open heart surgery. And at this age, with so much in your life, such a diverse, remarkable background, and a great life that you have actually opened up your heart towards every subject of your life. As compared to the theme, if I just connect it to the theme, how do you relate it to people's life in Kabir Bedi's life? So what do you say about that, sir?
I must have succeeded in some way, because my book did become a national bestseller. It did win the Amazon Most Popular Book Award for 2021. The Italian edition has got the Book of the Year Award at the Venice Film Festival. So I know that what I set out to do in some way worked. And it worked because when I was thinking of doing my autobiography, instead of writing it like a screenplay from beginning to end, I chose to do it really as a series of stories, because I know that people love stories. I was inspired by stories told to me by my parents. And those stories remained in my mind. And those stories especially, they had great emotional content, which is why, starting with the title of my book, which is Stories I Must Tell, The Emotional Life of an Actor, I wove in the themes of stories with emotion. And that's why I think it related. I wrote it with my heart, and so I held nothing back.
Manoj ji se ab mera agla sawal hai. If you bring in a change into the education system, considering you are a non-conformist, and that's where I would also ask you to tell about your takallus, muntashir, and introduce what is muntashir.
अगर आप मुझसे पूछते हैं कि इस देश की एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में क्या बदलना चाहिए, तो सबसे पहले तो ये बदलना चाहिए कि हम अपने इन्वेडर्स को सेलिब्रेट करना बंद करें. हमने बहुत सेलिब्रेट कर लिया. हम उन लोगों का जश्न मनाते रहे जिनका सच अगर आप पूछें तो भारत के विकास में, भारत के फैब्रिक में, हमारे सोशल फैब्रिक में कोई बहुत बड़ा योगदान नहीं है. अगर योगदान है तो नेगेटिव है. तो हम अपने सही हीरोज़ को पहचानें, सही नायकों को पहचानें. हमारी पाठ्य पुस्तकें, हमारा सिलेबस, उसमें ये तरमीम, ये तब्दीली आनी ही चाहिए. मैं ये मानता हूँ. पूरी दुनिया में शायद हिंदुस्तान का अकेला सिलेबस है टेक्स्ट बुक, और मैं सारे स्टेट्स की बात कर रहा हूँ, किसी एक स्टेट की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ, जहाँ अपने ही देश को थर्ड पर्सन में रेफर करते हैं. इंडिया में ऐसा हुआ, दिस हैपेंड इन इंडिया. अरे इंडिया इज योर कंट्री, हाउ आर योर टेक्स्ट बुक्स रिटन? आप ये क्यों नहीं कहते कि हमारे देश में ऐसा हुआ? हमारे देश वाली भावना हमसे बहुत दूर रखी गई. ये चीज़ बदलनी चाहिए. ये हमारा देश है, ये हमारी कंट्री है. हम इंडिया को थर्ड पर्सन में रेफर नहीं कर सकते. वो किताबें नहीं पढ़ सकते जिनमें इंडिया थर्ड पर्सन में रेफर किया जाता है. आपने मुंतशिर के बारे में कुछ कहा था. जी. मुंतशिर मेरी शख्सियत है, बहुत बिखरा बिखरा सा आदमी हूं मैं. मुंतशिर एक पर्शियन वर्ड है जिसका मतलब होता है बिखरा हुआ. एज सिंपल एज दैट, स्कैटर्ड. बस इतनी सी कहानी है. उठा लिया मनोज, मुंतशिर लगा के देखा, एलिट्रेशन अच्छा था, साउंड अच्छा था, फोनेटिक अच्छा था, मैं मुंतशिर हो गया. इतनी सी कहानी.
एज ए फिल्म राइटर, क्योंकि फिल्म और लिटरेचर, इसमें ज़मीन आसमान का फ़र्क है.
बिल्कुल.
मैं हार्डकोर हिंदी कमर्शियल फिल्म का राइटर रहा हूँ. साहित्य का काम बहुत बड़ा काम है, जो मनोज भी कर रहे हैं, ये भी कर रहे हैं. मैं कोशिश करूँगा आगे करने की. तो कमर्शियल सिनेमा मैंने बहुत लिखा है, और उससे जो मैंने सीखा, मैं चाहता हूँ जो लोग आगे सीखें. कमर्शियल सिनेमा में आपको ये ध्यान रखना पड़ता है कि जो थिएटर में आएगा उसको ये चीज़ पसंद आए. क्योंकि आपकी तो स्क्रिप्ट है, सामने वाले का बिजनेस है, प्रोड्यूसर का इन्वेस्टमेंट है, पैसे हैं, एक्टर का कैरियर है, स्टार का, सब कुछ इन्वॉल्व होता है। तो वो बहुत मुश्किल काम भी है। अगर आप सीख जाओ तो आसान भी है। दूसरी बात, आपको क्या स्टार की पर्सनालिटी और इमेज दोनों को दिमाग में रख के लिखना पड़ता है। जैसे आपको स्टार की इमेज अपने जहन में रखना पड़ती है कि पब्लिक को आप ऐसा नरेट करें कि थिएटर में बैठा आदमी उसमें बिलीव करे।
Here we start with our next session. The topic for this session, sustaining entrepreneurship. As tailwinds become headwinds, how should startups manage expectations?
Let me start with you, Sanjeev, quickly. India is home to more than 100 unicorns with a similar number waiting to join the club. In fact, funding, as we all know, we are all talking about the funding winter, it has slowed down. VCs, angel investors, private equity players have all shifted their focus from, beyond valuations to generating strong cash flows, really strong fundamentals. I want to know what conversations you're having with your portfolio companies right now. Has anything changed?
No, the conversations we have and we are having have never changed. And we have always maintained that the customer's money is better than the investor's money. Because if you're getting the customer's money and you're getting it at a price that's higher than your cost, chances are you have a viable business so long as you can get enough customers, right? And if you're getting the customer's money, then the investor's money will almost certainly follow should you need it and want it. Right? Because investors love to invest behind businesses that are getting customers, right? On the other hand, if you get the investor's money first, it is not necessary that the customer's money will follow. The customer is very discerning. The customer will only buy you a second time if it worked for him the first time. Right? And whereas getting the investor's money is often about impressing two young MBAs across the table with your PowerPoint. And if you're getting investors' money, it may just be a PowerPoint working, but you're getting the customer's money, your product and your business model is working.
Ritesh, coming to you now, as someone who's seen multiple ups and down cycles at OYO, and not just in India, but globally, what is your advice to Soonicorns that are now charting their growth journey in such uncertain times?
I think I'd say three things. First is, if consumer money is coming, investor capital will most certainly follow. The question is, what's the price, what's the deal? That's a different story, but capital will be available for companies that are getting consumer capital. There is no question about it. And you mentioned about ups and downs. 2 years back, we had hundreds of thousands of rooms, but not enough customers there.
Yes.
Now we have customers, but we don't have enough rooms. So it just tells you that nothing is permanent in this world.
True.
2 years back, people were saying, will travel ever come back? Now people are complaining that the room rates are so high. So I feel that if you keep at it, which is what I was coming to as a first attribute, resilience in my view is the single biggest attribute.
Okay.
If I am a Soonicorn, because until your customer's money keeps coming, as was being mentioned, and you keep at it, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. I'd say the second is solving for the depth of India. A lot of companies solve for the 50 crore or 100 crore or 200 crore revenue markets. But if you really want to raise capital and hence return capital as well, going after the big TAM, not just serving Gurgaon, but probably serving Gorakhpur as well,
Yes.
is valuable. And I'd say the last is that, and this is something that we've of course learned over the years, the power of good governance doesn't come 2 or 3 years before the IPO. It could probably start when you're even at a Series A stage.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we move on with our next session, Future Proofing India, educating the generation next for fuzzy careers.
Pramath, if I might, I would like to go with you first. You have been somebody who's really worked across the spectrum, from online education to creating one of the finest business schools in the country, and if I might hazard saying, creating one of the finest universities as well within the country. So you have seen education in terms of delivering the best value proposition. But where do you think we are struggling today? Or where do you think the challenge is for India? And where do you think are the opportunities for the future?
While we may create institutions like ISB and Ashoka, but honestly, they are not solving the larger problem for the country at all. It's a spray, a drop in the ocean. And I'm not saying this out of any humility about what I've done and all that, but it's really the scale of the challenge we have in the country. Forget even from a point of view of productivity and growth and so on. I mean, every child deserves a good education. And I don't think we have solved that fundamental problem. And I think that that's the problem we have to solve.
The reality is, like, education is not just about competition. It's not just about productivity. It's about potential. It's about our greatest potential. I don't know how many of you went to school thinking, I go to school to be able to develop the skills and mindsets to change the world. That's actually what education can do. So my first submission is we need to elevate collectively our belief on what education can really be and what it can unleash. The second is to be able to achieve foundational literacy or something higher in education, fix the breadth of issues in the country with education, we just need talent looking at that problem. So that's my second, people. And my third is really partnership with children.
Shaheen mentioned about them being a stakeholder, the primary stakeholder in deciding what could yield, what education could yield. I think survival skills, coping mechanisms, and finding their own answers, to be encouraged to discover, that is what is expected out of education. If we are not investing in capacity and quality of teachers, and that too early childhood, the primary, the foundational learning you said. If you just look at a simple education, the worst paid, the most inadequately equipped are the foundational learning teachers. So I think we need to look at education as a very wholesome engagement, where a whole community, it's not a row, column and cell of an Excel sheet. It's the whole Excel sheet and much more outside that boundary.
This is a conversation and a valedictory session combined together. Please put your hands together for Shri Anand Sharmaji, former Minister of Commerce and Industry, and Mr. Sunil Kanmunjal.
India's aggressive push for bilateral trade agreements. When you were in the ministry, at that time also a few of them got signed. And we have continued now also with the UK after the Brexit, with Europe, and a whole bunch of them. In your mind, is multilateralism completely dead? Or is this a step towards that?
I'm very happy to say that most of India's trade agreements which we signed, except for the one which we already had with Singapore, were done when I had the responsibility as Commerce and Industry Minister, and we took some of those decisions at a critical time. After the financial crisis in 2008-9, and when the economies were in turbulence, all economies were shaken, we took bold decisions. We stepped out and engaged. Our wisdom was questioned, especially when we, in 2009, within a week, we signed back-to-back agreements, first with India, ASEAN, which eventually evolved during our time into a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. And that gave us the opening, which I am still very keen on, that this government has let it drop off the table. I'm talking of the RCEP, which was ASEAN +6, which China was resisting, blocking our entry for long. And once we signed with ASEAN, that opened the path for us to engage with the larger Asia-Pacific region. Because we signed quickly with Japan, with South Korea, and we brought them in the loop to support us for what was used to be known as ASEAN +6, but what became RCEP. But we signed with Malaysia, we signed with Indonesia. We were almost there with the EU, but it was not because of India that we lost that agreement. It was the obduracy of the EU bureaucracy that let it fall off the table. Post-Brexit, the situation is different. I'm happy that there is a continuity in government in a country. Change of governments does not make disruptions. What I want to say, because you asked me about multilateralism. Multilateralism will not die with the bilaterals or the plurilateral agreements. As long as those who are signing these agreements, mindful of their own strength and economic interests, are also looking at the interconnected world. The world today has changed. It cannot be, irrespective of the agreements reached, the global dimension cannot be lost. That's where the WTO, which was established way back in 1998, the countries which were votaries for establishing the WTO were also not keen on strengthening it further and more keen on plurilaterals or the regional agreements. That will continue and both can coexist.
Thank you, sir.
Focus. Ideate. Innovate. Enable.